And one moment, please, while I transfer you. And here we go. Good afternoon. My name is Justin, and I will be your conference operator for the day. At this time, I would like to welcome everyone to the Midwest and Great Plains Drought Update Webinar conference call. All lines have been placed on mute to prevent any background noise. After the speaker's remarks, there will be a question and answer session. If you would like to ask a question during the duration of the call, simply press star, then the number 1 on your telephone keypad. If you would like to withdraw your question, press the pound key. Thank you very much for your time. And Mr. John Eyes is the Climate Service Program Manager from the National Weather Service. You may begin your conference.
Thank you, Justin, and welcome everyone from a very snowy Kansas City this afternoon. And we will shortly start with the Midwest and Great Plains Drought Update Webinar. We are happy to welcome Wendy Ryan from the Colorado State Climate Office at CSU today, and she will be our presenter. And Wendy, it's all yours.
Okay, thank you, John, and thank you for everyone for attending and letting me have this opportunity to brief you on drought conditions across the region. Just the photo there on the beginning slide shows how near and dear the drought has been to us in Colorado, especially in Fort Collins with the High Park fire last year. So we're very intimately familiar with what's going on, at least for Colorado. So just some of the collaborators for this call, myself, Dennis Toddy from South Dakota State Climate Office, Doug Cluck with NOAA, John Eyes as well, and then state climatologists, regional climate centers, NOAA, the National Drought Mitigation Center, and Iowa State University, and the Climate Prediction Center. And then just a brief announcement that the next drought webinar will be March 21st, and that's being presented by Pat, I think it's Guanin from Missouri. He's the Missouri State climatologist. And then all of these presentations, the current one and the past ones, can be accessed on the drought.gov site, which is the U.S. Drought Portal, and the link is given there at that third bullet. The agenda for today will be to talk about our current conditions and putting those into a historical context so we can understand them a little bit better. We'll talk about current impacts to different sectors like water supply and agriculture, and then talk about some of the predictions coming forth for the spring season, and then we'll take any questions or comments that you all have. So just some key points. This is a little wordy, but I want to make sure I hit them all. On current conditions, we have seen some improvement to the eastern part of the central region over the winter, not so much in the western part. We have frozen soils remaining in the northern portion of the region, while the southern portion of the region, we've seen some of those soil temperatures coming above freezing, mainly in Kansas and Colorado. The Great Lakes are of concern at this point. Lakes Michigan, Huron, and Superior are recording levels lower than their low water datum at this point. And we also have very low soil moisture conditions across much of the central region at this point in time. As far as our predictions go going forward, the El Nino Southern Oscillation, or ENSO, is forecast to be in neutral conditions through the fall. And we are not really expecting a return to La Nina, just that those neutral conditions, we're expecting for them to persist. And then the drought conditions are expected to persist along with that forecast for the western part of the central region, with some improvement coming, hopefully, for the northern and the eastern portions of the region. So just diving into some of this data, this is looking at precipitation across the United States, but we'll focus on the central region. The graphic on the left is showing November through January, and this data is compiled by the National Climatic Data Center, and it's ranking, excuse me, the precipitation for that period statewide. So you can see the western states, Colorado, Kansas, Nebraska, and Wyoming, showing below normal conditions over this period. Montana and Kentucky, the only states showing above normal, with everyone else in the region receiving around normal precipitation for November through January. The graphic on the right here shows the departure from normal precipitation for the past 60 days, and that would be December 23rd through yesterday. And again, just pointing to the fact that the western part of the region has been drier than normal, while the eastern part of the region has received above normal precipitation for the winter. with the exception of Ohio on that eastern edge. If we look at temperatures, and the big story with temperatures has been whether or not you've had snow cover on the ground or not. So you see very warm temperatures, above normal temperatures throughout Montana, Wyoming, eastern Colorado, Nebraska, Kansas, and Missouri, while we have below normal temperatures through the northern and eastern states, North Dakota, Minnesota, Wisconsin, Michigan, and fairly normal through Iowa, Illinois, and Indiana. Again, on the right-hand side, you see those temperature rankings for the November through January period. You see very warm conditions in Kansas for that November through January period, as well as Missouri. But above normal temperatures were being reported for many of the states in the central region for that period. I'll also note that western Colorado, which we're very familiar with, was very below normal for temperatures for January, and Grand Junction setting some low temperature records because they had that persistent snow cover on the ground. Talking about snow cover, this is the North snow cover model for today. And you can see that we've got some good snow cover throughout the region, particularly up into Montana, the mountains of Colorado and Wyoming, and throughout North Dakota. While it's good to see this good snow cover, just a reminder that we do have very low soil moisture conditions. So when this snow cover does melt off, a lot of that is going to go to filling that soil profile that is extremely dry at this point. So looking at our western states where a lot of the water supply comes from, you can see that the northern basins through Montana and Wyoming are showing fairly normal conditions for this point in the snow accumulation season. But as you go south into the North Platte and the South Platte River basins, you really see these percent of normal for snow water equivalent taking a dive, particularly the South Platte Basin and the North Platte Basin in Wyoming showing below normal conditions. If we look at the Missouri River Basin, so farther north, we're looking here on the left, the total snow water equivalent above Fort Peck, and then on the right from Fort Peck to Garrison. On the left, you can see that above Fort Peck is doing pretty good, 94% of normal for this state compared to their 1981 to 2010 average, and a little bit lower for the Fort Peck to Garrison area at 87% of normal. Also showing a high year and a low year here of 1997 and 2001, just for comparison. When we move a little bit farther south, the story changes a little bit, like I showed on that previous slide. This is from the Army Corps of Engineers, so the numbers deviate a little bit from what we saw from the NRCS, but they're putting the North Platte drainage at 71% of normal and the South Platte at only 47% of normal, which is a fairly significant deviation from normal at this time of year. Another area of concern, like I mentioned earlier, is the Great Lakes water level. This graphic is a little busy and a little small, so I'll do my best to explain it. But what we're showing is for each of the Great Lakes, a time series from 1918 through the current. You're looking at the actual water levels are the blue dots, and then the blue lines are an average for that period. This red line is normal, and then this the dark red line is the low water datum. So you can see that the Michigan Huron Lake is below their low water datum and very close to their minimum water level on record. Same thing with Lake Superior, below their low water datum and very close to their minimum on record. Erie and Ontario are not doing quite as bad, but still good to keep an eye on them as well. This is from the USGS, the 7-day average stream flow for the United States. You can see the northern portion of the region still has many frozen gauges that are not reporting yet. But there's a stark contrast here in the middle of the region with normal stream flow conditions being experienced throughout the eastern part of the region. But once you get into Kansas, Colorado, and Nebraska, we start seeing these below to much below normal stream flow conditions for this time of year, which are of much concern, particularly on the South Platte and the Arkansas here and throughout Kansas. If we look at the Mississippi River, you can see this is their water year hydrograph showing discharge in cubic feet per second in the blue. And then here's their mean daily stream discharge that they would experience. So you can see that they were below average for much of the winter season starting back in October of 2012. And then right at the end of the January, you see their hydrograph come up here and come back to normal conditions. And if you look on the right, I've put some non-snow precipitation graphics for January 28th, 29th, and 30th, showing good moisture falling as rain being delivered to the Mississippi River, which really brought that hydrograph up into normal conditions again. You see it drop off here again at the end of the period, but hopefully with the snow that's being experienced now, we won't see that persist too long. If we turn our attention to the agricultural impacts from the drought, this graphic is provided from the agricultural weather assessment from the World Agricultural Outlook Board from the USDA, and it's showing the U.S. cattle areas that are currently experiencing drought. The dark green are major livestock areas, and the light green is minor livestock areas. But you can see that 67% of domestic cattle inventory is experiencing some level of drought in the country. And I'm going to keep going back to low soil moisture conditions, but we really have a deficit to make up to return those pasture and grazing areas to good condition for the cattle. If we look at the U.S. hay areas, again, same kind of setup. The dark green is major, light green minor, and then the shading is showing you those areas that are in drought. So 57% of our domestic hay acreage is experiencing some level of drought as well. And then if we turn to winter wheat areas of the United States, we see that 59% of those areas are experiencing some level of drought. And you can see many of these areas are in the central region and experiencing very exceptional drought, the type of drought that you only see once or twice every 100 years. Here is that soil moisture that I've been talking about. On the left, we're looking at, this is an anomaly from the normal soil moisture for today. Well, actually, for this date. So the one on the left is November 10th. The one on the right is from February 15th when the model was run. So we're not looking at how much is needed to refill our soil profile. We're looking at what's needed to get back to our normal for these dates. And you can see throughout the central region very large deficits in soil moisture conditions throughout those areas, those agricultural producing areas that we just talked about. So just changes from November to February. You can see some improvements in Michigan with some good precipitation that they've received, but largely the rest of the region has been unchanged, some worsening of soil moisture conditions in Colorado and Wyoming. But just to reiterate that these deficits are quite large, and even with the moisture that we're receiving right now, which is very well received and needed, we're still going to have some big deficits to make up. If we look at soil temperatures and the potential for moisture to recharge those soils, you can see that the northern part of the region still has frozen soils, just like we saw those frozen river gauges through North Dakota, South Dakota, Minnesota, and northern Iowa. But then once you get into southern Nebraska, Kansas, eastern Colorado, we start to see those soil temperatures at the thawing range where we can actually get some infiltration into the soil profile. This is the current U.S. drought monitor that was just hot off the press, released this morning, just to give you the national view. And now we'll focus into the central region of the United States. So you can see that about 12 or 13% of the region is experiencing D4 conditions, which is exceptional drought, and that is the drought that you only experience once or twice out of 100 years. And you can see much of Nebraska in that, South Dakota, eastern Wyoming, and eastern Colorado, and western Kansas. Other areas also not doing so well. The only areas free of drought would be on the eastern portion of the basin and the northwestern, not basin, the region, and the northwestern portion of the region, with only 30% reporting no drought at all. So those are kind of our current conditions and what we're looking at. And now we're going to look at some climate outlooks. We'll look at the 2-week outlook, which is 8 to 14 day forecast. We'll look at what's expected to happen in March, as well as the spring period for March, April, and May. And then we'll also look at our drought outlook that's put out by the U.S. Drought Monitor. So just looking at the ocean conditions, you can see we normally look at the Niño 3.4 region for what will affect our weather, and that's this region here. And we see colder than normal sea surface temperatures in this region, normal to below normal. Again, we're not expecting a return to La Nina. We're expecting this to persist as a neutral condition throughout the fall. This is the forecast for ENSO, and you can see here's our current time, and then we're forecasting out through the fall, and you can see we're not really deviating very far from the zero anomaly here. So that's why we're expecting La Nina to not return and to stay in these neutral conditions. So what happens when we experience neutral conditions like we are right now? This is for the March through May period. And we're looking at years that were very similar to the conditions that we're under right now with ENSO. And these composite years would be 1953, 1960, 1967, 1981, 1991, and 2002. And this graphic is provided from Klaus Walter in Boulder at NOAA ESRL. The main points I just wanted to point to is that wetter than normal conditions had been seen during these periods for the northeastern portion of the region, so Michigan and Wisconsin. The areas in the middle we wouldn't give too much weight to just because they're not very significant, but the dry conditions to persist through Kansas and southwestern Colorado are of concern. These are fairly large, anomalies. So taking into account what is forecast to happen with ENSO and what we've experienced in the past when the neutral conditions have persisted, these are the forecasts that are now being put out by the Climate Prediction Center. These were also just released this morning, so very new outlooks here. On the left, we have temperature. On the right, we have precipitation, and this is for February 28th through March 6th. You can see that, again, the western part of the region is forecast to be above normal temperatures. The eastern part of the region will be below normal temperatures, with the central part pretty much around normal for temperature. But the big picture here is this big swath of below normal precipitation for much of the region, with the exception of Ohio and southern Colorado. So again, even though we're getting some moisture now, we're expecting to return to those dry conditions. If we look at the outlook for March, you can see on the left, again, temperature, on the right, precipitation. So colder than normal temperatures are expected for the northwestern part of the region, above normal temperatures for the eastern part of the region, and then again normal pretty much from a line from Colorado to Minnesota. For precipitation, you see this big area of below normal in the southwestern part of the United States, which includes Colorado and Kansas, where we've got very extreme drought conditions currently. But then you see, just like in that composite analysis, this bullet of above average precipitation over the Great Lakes area, Michigan, and Wisconsin, extending out to Minnesota and as far south as Arkansas. So good news for the Great Lakes region if this forecast verifies. But then normal precipitation for March through the central part. And then if we look at the 3-month outlook, which would be March through May, for temperature, you see a big portion of the United States with above normal temperatures. Just the northwestern part of the region will have near normal temperatures for this March through May period, but above average conditions prevailing for much of the central region. For precipitation, again, you see that same kind of analysis with the outcome of above normal for the eastern part of the region, below for the western part, particularly Colorado and Kansas. This is the U.S. Seasonal Drought Outlook. Again, this was just released this morning based on the forecast that we just looked at. Changes from the last drought outlook that came out were mainly just an increase in this some improvement area. Again, you see forecast improvement over the eastern portion, so Minnesota, excuse me, and the eastern Iowa. Again, kind of a mixed bag. We're hoping for some improvement in this region, but a big swath of persistence for our very drought-stricken areas at this point in Nebraska, Kansas, Colorado, and Wyoming, and farther west as well. So just in summary, again, the winter has brought wetter and cooler conditions to the eastern part of the central region, while drier and warmer than normal conditions have persisted for the western portion of the region. We have those frozen soils remaining in the Dakotas and northern Iowa and Minnesota, while the temperatures are above freezing in Nebraska, Kansas, eastern Wyoming, and Colorado. We've got very low Great Lakes levels on Michigan, Huron, and Superior, but with the forecast hoping that some of those levels can recover. And soil moisture for the central region, for a very large portion of it, is very low and has a long way to go to recover to get good conditions back. For the predictions, the ENSO neutral conditions are forecast through the fall of 2013, but again, we are not expecting the return to La Nina. And drought conditions are expected to persist in the western part of the central region, like I just showed, while there are some improvements forecast for the northern and the northeastern parts of the region over the next few months. If you are interested in drought assistance from the USDA, you can go to drought.gov and click on this USDA Federal Drought Assistance, and that will take you to that Federal Drought Assistance page if you're needing that information. If you want further information on any of the stuff that we've presented, here is a very large list of links that you can go to. All of the presentations that have been held by the Central Region are available at these URLs through both the Midwest and the High Plains Regional Climate Centers, as well as drought.gov. NOAA's National Climatic Data Center has lots of data that you can look at, as well as climate reports. The Climate Prediction Center, all of those graphics came from this URL to look at the outlooks if you wanted to look at those in any more depth. Climate.gov, drought.gov are full of great information, as well as your regional and state climatologists. So at this point, I think we'll open it up for any questions, if anyone has any.
Thank you very much. I'd just like to remind the participants, in order to ask a question, to please press star, then the number 1 on your telephone keypad, and we'll pause for just a few moments to see if there's any questions. Our first question comes from the line of somebody who left no response. Could you please introduce yourself when I open your line? Your line is now open.
Hi, this is Nathan Johnson with the Preston-Dakotan. You know, I'm in southeast South Dakota, kind of in that really heavy drought area. You know, it doesn't look like there's going to be much reprieve here in the short term. Are you making any predictions as far as into next year? Are we going to see any relief in this part of the country?
Actually, the South Dakota State climatologist is also on the line. Dennis, I don't have any predictions further out than that, but have you heard anything?
You know, what we're kind of taking away from this year is there are some opportunities for recovery this spring. The indications midsummer really are not strong one way or the other. My bigger concern midsummer is the warmer temperatures. With you know, a potential for warmer temperatures would strip out available soil moisture. You know, then the question becomes, are we in a longer, drier period? And while we can go back and look at some of these drier cycles, the wetter and drier periods, it's very difficult to look at those going ahead and saying that we are in a drier period. We may be, but it's very difficult to say that with any surety looking ahead next year.
Dennis.
There are no further questions at this time. Presenters, I turn the call back to you.
Okay. I guess, John, did you have anything else to add?
I believe I am complete on this side, and I would like to thank Wendy for having a wonderful presentation today. Thank you. Sure appreciate it. And for our other, for Dennis Toddy and others that were on our call today as part of our panel. Our next one will be coming up in March, and we'll be giving the information out very soon, and watch your email for the details. Thank you, everyone, and have yourselves a good evening.
This concludes today's conference call. You may now disconnect.